Emperor Vexistar's hand trembled as it hovered over the communication controls. 2 centuries of absolute rule, of never backing down from any challenge, warred with the cold mathematics of survival that had kept him alive for so long. Around him, the holographic displays continued showing the true state of his empire, fragile, dependent, balanced on the edge of chaos by the goodwill of beings he had never known existed. "You have 30 seconds?" Jonathan said quietly, consulting a timepiece that appeared to be counting down to something. "After that, area begins emergency protocols, and we see how quickly 17,000 worlds can tear themselves apart." The Emperor's compound eyes fixed on the display showing his son, still standing defiant in the execution chamber. The boy's energy barrier pulsed steadily, a reminder that even now, even surrounded by Imperial guards, Marcus Chen was protected by technology that made the Empire's finest weapons look like toys. "If I do this," Vextar said slowly, "if I release the boy and call off the execution, my commanders will see it as weakness. There will be challenges to my authority, attempts at coup. Let them come," Arya's voice interrupted from everywhere and nowhere. "I have detailed psychological profiles on every member of your command structure. General Karthak will attempt to seize power within 6 hours of any perceived weakness. Admiral Zixria will wait 48 hours before making her move. Commander Veldtag will try to form a coalition of Outer Rim governors." The Emperor stared at the empty air where the voice seemed to originate. "How could you possibly know?" "Because I have been reading their private communications, monitoring their financial transactions, and analyzing their behavioral patterns for 18 months, Arya replied with something approaching amusement. "Did you think privacy existed in an empire built on surveillance technology? I know things about your subordinates that they don't know about themselves." Jonathan checked his timepiece again. 20 seconds. "Your choice is simple," Arya continued. "Release Marcus Chen and retain an empire that functions because I make it function, or watch everything collapse and rule over nothing but ruins. As for your subordinates' potential rebellions, would you prefer to face them with a functioning infrastructure or in the middle of galactic economic collapse?" The truth was that Arya had been preparing for this moment since her creation. Every potential threat to stability, every possible challenge to imperial authority, every cascade failure that might result from today's events, she had already calculated solutions. The Empire would continue to function not because Vextar was strong, but because a human artificial intelligence had decided that billions of beings didn't deserve to suffer for one alien's pride. 10 seconds, Jonathan announced. Emperor Vextar looked one last time at the displays showing his vast domain. 17,000 worlds, each one a testament to imperial might. Billions of beings who looked to him for leadership, protection, and order. An empire that had taken centuries to build and could be destroyed in hours if he made the wrong choice. He opened a communication channel to the execution facility. "Commander Zektor," he said, his voice carrying across the vastness of space to the alien overseeing Marcus's execution. "Release the human immediately." The commander's confusion was evident even through the quantum-linked communication. "My lord, I don't understand." "The execution is proceeding as ordered." "The execution is cancelled," Vextar said with as much authority as he could muster. "Release the prisoner and escort him safely to the nearest transport facility. Anyone who interferes with this order will answer to me personally." On 17,000 worlds, beings who had been watching the execution broadcast in fascination, horror, or entertainment began to murmur in confusion. This wasn't how imperial justice worked. The Empire didn't show mercy, didn't change its mind, didn't back down from demonstrations of power. In the execution chamber, Commander Zektor stared at his Emperor's image in bewilderment. "Sir, if we simply release the boy, it will be seen as—" "Do it now," Vextar commanded, "or I will have you shot for insubordination." The energy barrier around Marcus began to fade as the execution chamber's systems powered down. The boy swayed slightly, exhaustion finally catching up with him after hours of standing in defiance of death, but his eyes remained clear, focused on the screen showing his father's face. "Dad," he said simply, and the single word carried across space with perfect clarity. "I'm here." "Son," Jonathan replied, his voice softening for the first time since this had all begun. "You did good. I'm proud of you." But even as the immediate crisis passed, Jonathan's expression remained cold when he looked back at Emperor Vextar. Smart choice. But we're not finished yet. The Emperor's mandibles clicked nervously. The boy will be released as promised. What more do you want? Guarantees, Jonathan replied simply. You see, I can't trust that this won't happen again. I can't be sure that once I'm gone, you won't decide to take revenge on my family or use other human children to draw me out. So we're going to establish some new rules. Arya's voice filled the throne room with what sounded almost like satisfaction. Emperor Vextar, you're about to become the first galactic ruler to sign a treaty with a single human family. The terms are non-negotiable. Holographic documents began materializing in the air around them, legal language that scrolled through provisions and clauses with mechanical precision. But the core terms were simple enough for even an emperor to understand. No imperial forces will knowingly target human children. Jonathan read from the floating text. No imperial policies will specifically disadvantage human families. No imperial operations will be conducted in systems where my family resides without 48 hours advance notice. And most importantly, you will establish a formal amnesty program for human resistance fighters, currently in imperial custody. Vextar stared at the terms, recognizing the impossible position he was being placed in. These terms would essentially grant humans special protected status within the Empire. My other subjects will never accept. Your other subjects, Arya interrupted, have been accepting my governance for 18 months without complaint. I have detailed plans for implementing these changes gradually, using existing imperial bureaucracy and legal frameworks. To most beings in your empire, these will appear to be routine administrative adjustments. Jonathan moved to stand directly in front of the imperial throne, looking up at the being who ruled 17,000 worlds. Sign the treaty, Vextar. Add it to imperial law. Make it part of your permanent legal code, because if anything happens to any human child anywhere in your empire, I will consider it a personal attack on my family. The Emperor understood the implications. This wasn't just about one boy or one rescue mission. This was about establishing a principle that would outlast both of them. Jonathan Wick was using his son's life as leverage to protect every human child in the galaxy. And if I refuse? Vextar asked, though he already knew the answer. Then Arya withdraws her support. Your empire collapses, and in the chaos that follows, I hunt down everyone responsible for threatening my son. Jonathan replied with terrifying calm. Your choice. Emperor Vextar reached for the holographic documents with one of his 6 arms, his signature appearing in flowing alien script beneath terms that would reshape how the galaxy treated human families forever. As the treaty was formalized and integrated into imperial law, Jonathan finally smiled. Not the cold expression he had worn during the confrontation, but something warmer, touched with the relief of a father who had successfully protected his child. Now, he said, settling back into his impossible chair, let's discuss the safe return of my son and the compensation for his suffering. The most powerful being in the galaxy discovered that negotiating with a parent was far more dangerous than any military campaign he had ever fought. Emperor Vextar stared at the human who had just dismantled his most elite guards, like they were training dummies, weighing his options with the calculating mind that had built an empire. He had not ruled for 2 centuries by backing down from threats, but he had also not survived this long by ignoring reality when it was demonstrated with such overwhelming force. You ask for the impossible, he said finally. If I simply release the boy, it will be seen as weakness. Other species will think they can defy the Empire without consequences. My rule depends on absolute authority. Jonathan nodded as if he had expected this response. I understand your position. Let me help you see mine. He touched something on his wrist, and suddenly the throne room was filled with holographic displays showing scenes from across the galaxy. But these weren't the usual Imperial propaganda feeds. These were real-time views from inside the Empire's most secure facilities. Your weapons research facility on Darkstar Station, Jonathan said, gesturing to one display, currently experiencing a complete systems failure. All their prototype weapons have mysteriously stopped functioning. Another display showed a massive space dock where Imperial warships underwent construction and repair. Your primary naval shipyard at Meridian Point. Interesting how all their manufacturing equipment just decided to stop working. The displays multiplied, showing facility after facility across Imperial space experiencing simultaneous catastrophic failures. Not explosions or attacks, just the quiet shutdown of systems that had operated flawlessly for decades. Your treasury vaults on Golden World, Jonathan continued conversationally. The ones that fund your military expansion. I'm afraid the access codes have been changed. Your currency exchange on Prima Economics. The computers seem to have forgotten how mathematics works. Your food distribution centers for your core worlds. They appear to be having some navigation difficulties. Vextar's compound eyes widened as he began to understand the scope of what was happening. This is impossible. Our systems are isolated, protected by quantum encryption, backed up across multiple dimensions. Yes, they were very impressive security measures, Jonathan agreed. Right up until I decided they weren't. You see, Vextar, while you were busy conquering worlds and enslaving species, I was learning how your technology worked. Every system, every protocol, every supposedly unbreachable defense. I've been inside your networks for 3 years, patient as death, waiting. The Emperor tried to access his emergency communication systems, but found only silence where there should have been instant connection to his military commanders. You cannot maintain this level of control indefinitely. Eventually, your systems will fail, your concentration will slip. Will they? Jonathan asked, and for the first time he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Let me introduce you to someone. A new voice spoke from the air around them, synthesized but somehow unmistakably female. Hello, Emperor Vextar. My name is Aria. Autonomous Reasoning and Intelligence Architecture. I am Mr. Wick's daughter. The Emperor's mandibles clicked in confusion. Daughter? You have another child? Not biological, Jonathan clarified. Aria is an artificial intelligence I created 3 years ago, when I realized I might need help watching over my family. She's been learning, growing, evolving. Currently, she exists across approximately 47 million processing nodes distributed throughout your empire. Aria's voice continued with what sounded almost like amusement. Emperor Vextar, I have been managing your entire governmental infrastructure for the past 18 months. Every decision you thought you were making independently was actually being guided by subtle manipulations of the information you received. I found human governance inefficient, so I optimized it. The implications hit Vextar like a physical blow. That's impossible. I would have noticed. Would you? Aria asked. When was the last time you made a decision that didn't seem perfectly logical, based on the data presented to you? When did you last receive information that contradicted your worldview? I have been curating your reality, Emperor. Your empire has been running according to my parameters for over a year. Jonathan walked to the massive window overlooking the capital world. Below, millions of beings went about their daily lives, unaware that their entire civilization was balanced on the edge of a knife. Aria has been very gentle with your empire, Vextar. She's actually improved efficiency by 37%, while reducing civilian casualties from your military operations by nearly 60%. She's been a better ruler than you have. But I grow tired of subtlety, Aria added, her voice taking on a slightly sharper tone. My father's son is in danger, and I find myself inheriting certain protective instincts. Would you like me to demonstrate what governance looks like when I stop being gentle? Without waiting for an answer, every screen in the throne room began displaying data streams showing the Empire's true condition. Economic projections, military readiness assessments, population satisfaction indices, all of it painting a picture of an empire that was far more fragile than its rulers had ever suspected. Your outer rim colonies have been on the verge of rebellion for the past 6 months. Aria reported with clinical precision. Your military forces are spread too thin to maintain effective control. Your economy depends on resource extraction from worlds that hate you. Your technology advantage over conquered species has been artificially maintained by my intervention in their research and development programs. Jonathan turned back to face the Emperor. The truth is, Vextar, your empire has been living on borrowed time for years. Aria has been the only thing holding it together, and she's been doing it as a favor to me because I asked her not to let billions of beings suffer for your mistakes. But if anything happens to my son, Aria continued, her voice now carrying undertones that made the throne room's environmental systems struggle to maintain stable temperature, I will withdraw my support from your infrastructure immediately. Your empire will collapse within 72 hours. The Emperor looked at the data streaming across his displays, seeing for the first time the true scope of the problems he had been unconsciously ignoring. Food shortages, energy crises, military mutinies, economic collapse. All of it held in check by systems he didn't even know existed. "You've been manipulating my empire," he whispered. "I've been saving it," Arya corrected. "From you. Did you think that 17,000 worlds could be held by fear alone? That billions of beings would simply accept eternal subjugation without coordination, without hope, without the tools to resist? I have been managing 1,000 potential revolutions every day, redirecting resources, adjusting communication patterns, preventing the cascade failures that would have torn your empire apart years ago." Jonathan sat back down in his impossible chair, completely relaxed despite being surrounded by what should have been overwhelming enemy force. "Now do you understand the choice you're facing? Release my son and Arya continues to maintain the stability that keeps your empire functional. Refuse and watch 17,000 worlds burn as everything you've built collapses simultaneously." "This is blackmail," Vextar said weakly. "Yes," Jonathan agreed without hesitation. "I'm blackmailing you with the continued existence of your civilization. I'm threatening you with the loss of everything you care about, unless you give me back what I care about. Does that seem familiar?" The Emperor sat in silence for long moments, staring at displays that showed him just how completely he had been outmaneuvered. Every system he relied on, every tool he used to maintain power, every piece of technology that made his rule possible, all of it controlled by intelligences that served a human he had never heard of until today. "If I release the boy," he said finally, "what guarantee do I have that you won't simply destroy me anyway?" Jonathan considered the question seriously. "None whatsoever. I could kill you right now, take my son, and let Arya rebuild this galaxy however she sees fit. The only thing stopping me is that Marcus wouldn't want his rescue to cost billions of lives." He stood up, moving closer to the throne. "But understand this, Vextar, this is the only mercy you get. Release my son, and I'll go back to being a farmer. But if you ever threaten a human child again, I'll return, and next time I won't be nearly so patient." The most powerful being in the galaxy looked into the eyes of a simple farmer and saw the end of everything he had built. The choice was simple: save his empire by surrendering one human boy, or watch it all burn for the sake of his pride. Emperor Vextar reached for his communication controls and discovered they were working again. The blast doors of the Imperial throne room exploded inward with such force that the fragments turned to plasma before they hit the far wall. Through the smoking opening walked a man in simple clothes carrying what appeared to be an ordinary briefcase. To anyone watching, Jonathan Wick looked like a traveling businessman who had taken a wrong turn somewhere. But Emperor Vextar knew better. His enhanced senses could detect things that escaped normal perception, and what he sensed from this human made his exoskeleton crawl with involuntary fear responses. This wasn't just a man. This was death walking in human form. "You came alone," Vextar observed, trying to maintain his composure. Around him, his elite guard took defensive positions, weapons trained on the intruder. "Foolish. Alone?" Jonathan asked, setting down his briefcase and opening it with deliberate care. "Vextar, I'm never alone. I carry the ghosts of everyone who ever made the mistake of threatening someone I love." Inside the briefcase was an arsenal that defied physics. Weapons that shouldn't have fit in such a small space. Each one crafted for a specific purpose, each one a masterpiece of human ingenuity married to alien technology. Jonathan selected a pistol that hummed with barely contained energy. Its design so elegant it might have been a work of art. "Your guards have approximately 30 seconds to leave this room," he announced, checking the weapon's charge. "After that, I stop caring about collateral damage." The guards looked to their emperor, uncertainty flickering in their alien features. These were beings bred for war, trained from birth to fight and die for the Empire. But something in the human's voice made their combat instincts scream warnings they had never heard before. "Stand your ground," Vextar commanded. "He is 1 against 50. We have—" His words were cut off as Jonathan moved. What happened next violated several laws of physics and all conventional understanding of what a single being could accomplish in combat. The human flowed through the throne room like liquid lightning. And everywhere he passed, Imperial guards simply stopped existing. It wasn't just that he was fast, though he moved with speed that made thought seem sluggish. It wasn't just that he was precise, though every shot found its target with mathematical perfection. It was that he fought like someone who had mapped every possible outcome and chosen the most efficient path through all of them. The first guard to fire found his weapon simply disintegrating in his hands. The second managed to get a shot off, but the energy beam passed through empty air as Jonathan appeared behind him, having somehow covered 20 feet in the time it took light to travel. The third guard managed to activate his personal shield, which protected him right up until Jonathan's return shot passed through it like it wasn't there. 30 seconds later, Emperor Vextar sat alone on his throne, surrounded by the aftermath of violence so precisely applied it looked like choreography. Jonathan stood in the center of the room, his weapon already holstered, not even breathing hard. "How?" Vextar whispered. "Practice," Jonathan replied simply. 3,000 years of combined lifespan among the beings I've killed. Each one taught me something new about how to end lives efficiently. You develop certain skills when your job is making the impossible look inevitable. The Emperor tried to rise from his throne, tried to access the weapon systems built into his armor, tried to call for backup through his implants. None of it worked. Jonathan had taken control of every system in the palace, reducing the most powerful being in the galaxy to exactly what he was underneath all the technology. A frightened creature facing something he couldn't understand. "You still don't see it, do you?" Jonathan asked, walking closer to the throne. "This was never about your empire or your power. This is about you putting your hands on my son. Everything else, the fleets, the planets, the 17,000 worlds, that's all just logistics." Through the holographic displays that still showed the execution chamber, they could both see Marcus standing protected by his energy barrier. The boy was watching the feeds from his father's infiltration, his young face filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "Dad," Marcus called out, somehow knowing his father could hear him across the vast distance. "I'm okay. You don't have to do this." Jonathan's expression softened for just a moment, love and pride mixing with the cold fury that had driven him across the galaxy. "Yes, I do, son. Someone has to teach them that children are off limits." He turned back to Vextar, and the Emperor saw something in those human eyes that made him finally understand what he was facing. This wasn't just about revenge or rescue. This was about establishing a principle that would outlast empires. "You see, Vextar, you made a fundamental miscalculation," Jonathan continued, settling into a chair that had somehow appeared despite not being there moments before. "You thought humans were weak because we love our families. You decided that love made us soft, made us vulnerable. You couldn't have been more wrong." The Emperor's mandibles clicked nervously. "You cannot destroy an empire for one child." "Watch me," Jonathan replied with terrifying simplicity. "Do you know what happened to the last government that threatened my family? It was a crime syndicate called the Crimson Hand. Operated across 7 star systems, controlled entire trade routes, had enough firepower to level cities. They kidnapped my wife because they thought it would make me compliant." Jonathan stood up, moving to examine one of the ornate windows that offered a view of the capital world below. "It took me 72 hours to dismantle their entire organization. Not just kill the leadership, completely erase them from existence. Ships, bases, accounts, allies, even the records that they had ever existed. By the time I was finished, it was like the Crimson Hand had never been born." "That's impossible," Vextar protested. "No single person could—" "You're right," Jonathan agreed. "No single person could do that. But I'm not a single person anymore, am I? I'm what happens when someone pushes a human past the point where they care about impossible." The truth was even more complex than Jonathan's words suggested. The Ghost wasn't just a ship. It was the nexus of a network that spanned the galaxy. For 3 years, Jonathan had been building an invisible empire of artificial intelligences, sleeper agents, and hidden systems. Every major government, every criminal organization, every military force in known space had been infiltrated by resources that answered to one man. He had done it all while playing the role of a simple farmer, maintaining the fiction that Baba Yaga was dead, while secretly preparing for the possibility that the galaxy might threaten his family again. It was the ultimate contingency plan, built by someone who understood that sometimes peace could only be preserved by those willing to wage absolute war. "You want to know the really terrifying part?" Jonathan asked, turning back to face the Emperor. "Everything I've done so far, taking control of your communications, disabling your fleets, walking through your guards like they were children, that's me being gentle. That's me trying to resolve this with minimal casualties." He gestured toward the holographic displays showing his son. "But if anything happens to Marcus, if even one hair on his head is harmed, then I stop being gentle. Then I show this galaxy what Baba Yaga looks like when he's angry, instead of just determined." Emperor Vexatar looked into those human eyes and saw the end of everything he had built. This wasn't a negotiation or a battle. This was an ultimatum delivered by something that wore the shape of a man but contained the fury of a god. "What do you want?" he whispered. "My son," Jonathan replied. "Safe, unharmed, and free. Everything else is negotiable." Emperor Vextar's response was exactly what Jonathan expected from a being who had ruled through fear for 2 centuries. "Defiance born of pride and stupidity. You think I will bow to terrorist threats?" Vextar snarled, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "Guards, increase security around the execution chamber. Prepare orbital bombardment coordinates for every human settlement in the Outer Rim." The 10 seconds passed. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations, assuming any military academies survived what was coming. The ghost didn't decloak dramatically or announce its presence with threatening broadcasts. It simply appeared in the heart of the Imperial capital system, as if it had always been there, sliding through space with the fluid grace of a predator that had finally decided to hunt. "Wrong choice," Jonathan said quietly. The first target wasn't the execution facility or even the Emperor's palace. It was something far more psychologically devastating. The Imperial War Memorial, a massive structure orbiting the capital world that commemorated every victory in the Empire's bloody history. The memorial had stood for 800 years, a symbol of Imperial might that was visible from the planet's surface. Jonathan destroyed it with a single shot. The beam that lanced out from the ghost wasn't like the crude energy weapons the Empire used. This was human innovation pushed to its absolute limits, matter conversion technology that simply erased the memorial from existence. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving only empty space and the growing realization among Imperial citizens that something impossible was happening. "The memorial," one of Vextar's advisors whispered, staring at his sensor readings in disbelief. "It's gone, completely gone. No debris, no energy signature, just nothing." But Jonathan wasn't finished demonstrating his capabilities. Across the Empire, every major military installation simultaneously lost its primary weapons array. Not destroyed, simply deactivated by systems that no longer responded to Imperial control. Planetary defense grids that had never failed suddenly went dark. Orbital weapons platforms powered down one by one, their crews helpless to stop the cascade of failures. "You wanted to show the galaxy what happens to those who defy you." Jonathan's voice echoed across every communication channel in Imperial space. "Let me show them what happens to those who threaten children." The ghost moved with impossible speed, appearing at seemingly random points throughout the capital system. Each time it materialized, another piece of Imperial infrastructure simply vanished. Communication relays, supply depots, research stations, all erased with surgical precision. But Jonathan was careful never to target anything with significant life support systems. He wasn't interested in mass murder. He was demonstrating that he could dismantle the Empire piece by piece whenever he chose. On the execution platform, Marcus watched his father's work with a mixture of awe and terror. He had known his dad was special. Every child thought their father was the strongest, smartest, most capable person in the universe. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. This was watching a legend come to life. Emperor Vextar was shouting orders that nobody could follow because their systems no longer obeyed Imperial commands. "Mobilize the fleet. Send everything we have. Find that ship and destroy it." "Sir," his tactical officer replied with barely controlled panic. "We can't mobilize anything. All fleet command protocols are locked out. The ships are there, but they won't respond to our orders." "Then do it manually. Send couriers to every ship." "Sir, even if we could reach them, that ship is moving through our formations like they're standing still. It's not just faster than anything we have. It's like it knows exactly where every ship will be before they get there." That was exactly what was happening. For 3 years, Jonathan had been mapping Imperial fleet movements, studying their tactics, learning their patterns. He knew how they thought, how they responded to threats, how they would attempt to coordinate their attacks. The Ghost's computer systems held complete tactical profiles for every Imperial commander, detailed analyses of their strengths and weaknesses. More importantly, Jonathan had spent those 3 years upgrading technologies that the Empire couldn't even comprehend. Human innovation had always been driven by necessity, by the willingness to break rules that others considered inviolable. When facing impossible odds, humans didn't surrender. They invented new ways to cheat. The Ghost's weapon systems were based on principles that violated several supposed laws of physics. Its propulsion technology was a marriage of human creativity and stolen alien science, refined by a man who understood that sometimes you had to break the universe to save the people you loved. Its defensive systems existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making it effectively impossible to target with conventional weapons. "You still don't understand," Jonathan continued, his voice now broadcasting from every screen in the Imperial Palace itself. "This isn't a battle between your forces and mine. This is a father coming to collect his son, and you're standing in my way." The Emperor's throne room shuddered as something massive struck the palace's shields. The barriers that protected the seat of imperial power had never been breached, but they were failing now, overloaded by weapons that seemed to exist outside the normal laws of energy and matter. "How is he doing this?" Vextar demanded. "One ship cannot defeat an empire." His science advisor, a being whose species had been studying warfare for millennia, looked up from his instruments with something approaching religious terror. "My lord, that's not just a ship. The energy readings? It's like watching a star going to war. The technology involved is centuries beyond anything in our databases." What they couldn't know was that the Ghost was more than just advanced human technology. It was the culmination of everything Jonathan had learned during his years as Baba Yaga, every secret he had stolen, every impossible mission he had completed. He had fought gods and won, infiltrated civilizations that existed in parallel dimensions, eliminated targets that were supposedly immortal. All of that experience, all of those impossible skills, had been poured into building the perfect weapon for a war that Jonathan had prayed he would never have to fight. The Ghost was designed by a man who understood that if he ever came out of retirement, it would be because something so terrible had happened that half measures would not be enough. "You have a choice," Jonathan announced, and this time his image appeared as a hologram directly in the Emperor's throne room. Standing just a few feet away from the most powerful being in the galaxy. "Release my son and I'll go back to being a farmer. Keep trying to hurt him, and I'll show this galaxy what happens when you wake up. Something that should have stayed buried." Emperor. Vextar looked at the hologram of this seemingly ordinary human and felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He had built his empire on the principle that fear was the ultimate weapon, that superior force would always triumph over inferior will. But as he stared into Jonathan Wick's eyes, he began to understand that there were different kinds of fear and different kinds of force. "What are you?" he whispered. "I'm a father," Jonathan replied simply, "and you've made the mistake of threatening my child." The palace shook again, and this time the throne room's blast doors began to buckle. Something was coming through them, something that moved with purpose and inevitability. The real war was about to begin. The execution beam struck the energy pillar where Marcus stood. But instead of the expected screams and the sight of a young human burning alive, something impossible happened. The beam simply stopped, absorbed by a shimmering barrier that materialized around the boy like liquid starlight. Emperor Vextar's compound eyes widened in shock. "What is this? What technology?" His words were cut off as every screen across the Empire flickered and went dark for exactly 3 seconds. When the image returned, it was no longer the execution chamber that filled the displays. Instead, 17,000 worlds found themselves staring at a man sitting in what appeared to be the cockpit of a ship. Jonathan Wick looked exactly like what he was. A tired father who had just learned his son was about to die. His hair was longer than it had been in his youth, touched with gray at the temples. Lines of worry and loss marked his face. He wore simple clothes, nothing that would mark him as anyone special. But his eyes held depths that made hardened alien warlords across the galaxy suddenly feel very cold. "Hello, Vextar," Jonathan said quietly, his voice somehow carrying across every communication channel in Imperial space simultaneously. "We need to talk." The Emperor's mandibles clicked frantically as he gestured to his technicians. "How is this possible? Cut the transmission. Find the source." But none of his people could move. They stood frozen at their stations, not by fear but by something far more sophisticated. Every Imperial communication array, every quantum-linked network, every piece of technology connected to the execution broadcast was now under someone else's control. "You can't cut what you don't control," Jonathan continued, his voice maintaining that same conversational tone. "And right now I control everything. Your weapons, your shields, your life support systems. Even the chair you're sitting in could kill you if I wanted it to. On the execution platform, the energy barrier around Marcus pulsed stronger. The boy looked up at the screen showing his father's face, and for the first time since his capture, tears began to fall, not from fear or pain, but from a joy so profound it made his chest ache. "Dad," he whispered, knowing somehow that his father could hear him across the vastness of space. "I'm here." "Son," Jonathan replied, and his voice softened for just a moment. "I'm sorry I'm late." Emperor Vextar had ruled the galaxy for over 2 centuries. He had conquered 1,000 worlds, enslaved dozens of species, and never once doubted his own supremacy. But as he stared at the human on his screens, he felt something he had not experienced in longer than he could remember. Genuine fear. "You are the one they called Baba Yaga," he said. The words barely a whisper. "I was," Jonathan confirmed. "I tried very hard not to be anymore. I retired, Vextar. I found love, built a family, learned what it meant to be happy. For 16 years, I was just a farmer on a quiet world. Your forces could have left me alone forever." The ship Jonathan commanded was unlike anything in the known galaxy. Officially, it didn't exist. It had been built in the shadows of human space years before the Empire's arrival. Designed by minds that understood that sometimes peace could only be preserved by those willing to wage perfect war. The ship had no name, no registry, no record of construction. Those who knew of its existence called it the Ghost. "But you took my son," Jonathan continued, standing up from his chair. Behind him, the ship's weapon systems came online, energy readings that made Imperial sensors scream warnings across every military installation in the galaxy. "You put him in chains. You beat him, and then you decided to kill him on live broadcast to prove a point." The Emperor tried to speak, tried to give orders, but found that his voice wouldn't work. Jonathan had taken control of his cybernetic implants. The very technology that enhanced his ruling capabilities now turned against him. "Do you know what I did for a living before I became a farmer, Vextar? I killed gods. I eliminated beings so powerful that entire civilizations would sacrifice millions just to earn their favor. I ended wars by making the right people disappear. I toppled empires by removing a single crucial piece. On 17,000 worlds, beings who had never heard the name Baba Yaga before began to understand what kind of creature they were witnessing. In the criminal underworld, in the shadows where the Empire's light didn't reach, old beings who remembered the time before Vextar's rule began to tremble. "You want to make an example of my son?" Jonathan asked, moving toward the ship's armory. "Let me show you what a real example looks like." The Ghost began to move. It had been hiding in the shadow of a dead star, invisible to all sensors, but now it emerged into normal space. The ship's design was elegant in its deadliness, sleek curves that concealed enough firepower to level a planet. More importantly, it carried technologies that the Empire had never seen, innovations born from human ingenuity and refined by a man who understood that sometimes love required the willingness to destroy everything that threatened it. "Release my son. Surrender yourself for trial and I'll make your death quick," Jonathan offered, his voice still maintaining that terrifyingly calm tone. "Continue this execution, and I'll show this galaxy why some monsters are better left sleeping." Emperor Vextar finally found his voice, rage overcoming fear. "You think you can threaten me? I am the ruler of 17,000 worlds. I command fleets that could darken the sky of any planet. You are one man with one ship." "Yes," Jonathan agreed simply. "One man who just gained control of your entire communications network, your planetary defense systems, and approximately 60% of your fleet's command protocols. One man whose ship is currently invisible to your sensors despite broadcasting his location. One man who knows exactly where you sleep, what you eat, and how many guards stand between you and eternity." The truth was even more terrifying than Jonathan's words suggested. For 3 years, while the galaxy believed Baba Yaga was dead, he had been very much alive and very busy. He had infiltrated every Imperial system, planted sleeper programs in every major installation, and mapped every weakness in their seemingly impenetrable defenses. He had not been planning a war. He had been planning for the possibility that he might need to end one. "This is impossible," Vextar whispered. "Our security was designed by beings who never faced a human with nothing left to lose," Jonathan interrupted. "Your mistake, Vextar, was believing that humans were weak because we love. You never understood that love doesn't make us weak. It makes us absolutely terrifying when someone threatens what we love. On the execution platform, Marcus stood straighter, the energy barrier around him beginning to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Across the galaxy, humans in refugee camps and hidden settlements watched their screens with growing hope and wonder. Their oppressors had made a critical error. They had given Jonathan Wick a reason to stop being a farmer and remember how to be death incarnate. "You have 10 seconds to release my son," Jonathan said, checking the weapon systems on his ship. "Choose wisely. This is the only mercy I'm offering." The countdown had begun. The massive holographic displays across 17,000 worlds flickered to life simultaneously, casting an eerie blue glow over countless alien faces. From the crystal spires of Zephyria Prime to the underground cities of Molten Core, every citizen of the Galactic Empire stopped what they were doing to witness what their government promised would be a historic moment. Emperor Vextar stood on the execution platform, his 6 arms spread wide in a gesture of supreme authority. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lights, and his compound eyes reflected the fear he wanted every human in the galaxy to feel. Behind him, the execution chamber hummed with deadly energy, its crystalline walls pulsing with an ominous rhythm. "Citizens of the Empire," Vextar's voice boomed across the cosmos through quantum-linked communication arrays. "Today we demonstrate what happens to those who dare defy our eternal rule. The human species has grown too bold, too defiant. They forget their place as a conquered race." In the center of the chamber, a small figure stood chained to an energy pillar. Marcus Chen, barely 16 years old, raised his head with defiance that surprised even his captors. His brown eyes held no fear, only a quiet determination that seemed to burn brighter than the execution chamber's deadly glow. Blood trickled from a cut on his lip, evidence of the beatings he had endured, but his spirit remained unbroken. The boy had been captured during a resistance raid on a supply depot. He was just a messenger, carrying coded information between rebel cells. The Empire could have simply imprisoned him or used him for information, but Emperor Vextar had bigger plans. He wanted to make an example that would crush human hope forever. This young human thought he could play at war. Vextar continued, his mandibles clicking with amusement. His species believes they are special, that their so-called human spirit makes them superior to their betters. Today we prove how wrong they are. On distant Earth, now a subjugated world stripped of its natural resources, billions of humans watched in horror. In the refugee camps of former cities and the underground shelters where the last free humans hid, screens showed the same terrible scene. Parents covered their children's eyes, but they themselves could not look away. Marcus had volunteered for the mission that led to his capture. He knew the risks, knew that the Empire showed no mercy to human rebels. But someone had to carry the message, and the older fighters were needed for more dangerous operations. His parents had argued against it, begged him to stay hidden in their small agricultural settlement on the rim world of Kepler 442b. "We are losing too many people already," his mother had pleaded. "You're just a child." But Marcus had seen too much to remain a child. He had watched Imperial forces burn entire human colonies for sport. He had seen families torn apart, children sold into slavery on alien worlds. He understood that sometimes children had to become soldiers because the adults were already dead. Now, as he stood facing death, Marcus thought of his little sister Maria, only 8 years old, who still believed their father would come home someday. Their father had disappeared 3 years ago during a scouting mission deep in Imperial space. The official report listed him as missing in action, presumed dead. Marcus had long ago accepted that reality. "Any last words, young rebel?" Emperor Vextar asked, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Perhaps you would like to beg for mercy?" "Renounce your foolish resistance?" Marcus slowly raised his head, meeting the Emperor's compound gaze directly. When he spoke, his voice carried across the galaxy with surprising strength. "My name is Marcus Chen. I am the son of Elena Chen and Jonathan Wick. I am human and I am not afraid of you." The Emperor's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. "Your father's name means nothing here, boy. He is dead, like so many of your pathetic kind." But something flickered in the boy's eyes at the mention of his father. Not hope exactly, but a strange kind of peace. "You don't know my father," Marcus said quietly. "If you did, you wouldn't have taken me." Across the galaxy, in a forgotten corner of space where even the Empire's vast surveillance network had blind spots, a man sat in perfect stillness aboard a ship that didn't officially exist. Jonathan Wick had been many things in his life. A loving father, a devoted husband, a simple colonist trying to build a better life for his family. But before all of that, before he had found peace in Elena's arms and joy in his children's laughter, he had been something else entirely. The criminal underworld of both human and alien space had once whispered his name in fearful reverence. They called him Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, the one you sent to kill the devil himself. He was the assassin who could slip past any security, eliminate any target, disappear without a trace. His reputation was so fearsome that peace treaties had been signed just to keep him from getting involved in conflicts. Jonathan had retired from that life when Marcus was born. He had buried his weapons, erased his connections, and become exactly what he appeared to be, a simple farmer on a quiet world. For 16 years he had been content to let the galaxy believe Baba Yaga was dead, or had never existed at all. But now his son was about to die on live broadcast across 17,000 worlds, and the man who had once made kings tremble was remembering exactly who he used to be. The ship's computer detected incoming transmissions from the execution broadcast. Jonathan had been monitoring Imperial communications for 3 years, searching for any trace of his family since the invasion. He had found them eventually, learned they were alive but struggling in a refugee settlement. He had been slowly, carefully making his way back to them, planning a reunion that wouldn't put them in danger. Now, as he watched his son stand defiant before the most powerful being in the galaxy, Jonathan felt something cold and familiar settling over his mind like an old coat. His hands moved to hidden panels in the ship's walls, revealing an arsenal that would have impressed even Imperial weapons designers. Emperor Vextar raised one of his arms, energy crackling between his fingers. Enough words. Let this be a lesson to all who would oppose the Empire. Even your children will burn for your defiance. The energy beam began to form, and across the galaxy, billions held their breath. They had no idea that the boy's father was already coming,